Right. Here we are, Prospect Weekly Roundup. I have been off the show for a couple of weeks, thanks to Ryan Cooper for taking over for me. But we are back, and this is a big week for us here at the Prospect. We have launched our special issue called How Pricing Really Works. It was done in collaboration with the Groundwork Collaborative, and that's why we have on the show. Very happy to bring her on, Lindsay Owens, the executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative. Lindsay, how you doing?
I'm great, Dave. It's good to see you. Thanks for inviting me to join and excited to talk about our very splashy and revelatory special issue.
Yeah, we're definitely trying to push this out to every corner of the country as we launch it. I mean, maybe we'll start by just sort of taking people behind the scenes of this project. I think we first talked about this like 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, and it was obviously you guys have done an incredible job talking about inflation and what the true sources of it are. Doing the deep dives, digging into earnings calls, looking at what, I mean, it's amazing that it takes an organization like yours to say, hey, you know what? Prices are going up. Let's see what the people who are raising the prices are saying about it,
Right.
right?
Right. They have
Uh,
nothing to do with this at all. They're just
yeah,
yeah,
they're
right.
just they're
Just
just
taking orders from
just
the
taking orders from
inflation
the
gods on
invisible
high.
from
Yeah.
the invisible hand from the free
Right.
market.
Right.
So you've done that great work, and I mean, I think what you found is that there's this certain giddiness among corporate CEOs about prices and this ability during the pandemic to make some experiments, make some tests on pricing strategies, and then this sort of coalesced into this idea of, well, what are these pricing strategies, and let's delineate them, and let's do deep dives on each one of them, and then we'll sort of frame it in this sort of thesis that we had, really you had, that we wrote about in our initial piece called "The Age of Recruitment." Maybe we could like sort of lay out our thesis kind of concept here.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talk about in the piece, which sort of overviews the issue, but also really, I think, tees up the intellectual framework for the issue, is this idea that for decades, the sort of most common, most aggressive, most mercenary form of American capitalism, the kind of American capitalism that I grew up with, centered on cost cutting, right? It was about offshoring jobs and outsourcing supply chains and accountants and CFOs who are real bean counters, making sure you didn't spend a dollar more than you needed to in an earnings quarter. And it was about driving down labor costs at home domestically too, union busting, wage suppression, all of that. And at some point that strategy hits bone, right? There are a fixed amount of costs that you
Right.
have
If you
to
want to make a product, you
undertake.
actually have to spend a little bit of money to make that
Right.
product and
Not a huge
ship
amount of
it
money,
and
but
get it
a
to
little bit amount of a little
yeah.
bit of money, right? Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is like that, that's a strategy that is not as viable in a world of inflation, right? Where
Right.
your little bit of fixed costs are starting to go up, right? It's hard to play on wage suppression in a full employment economy. It's hard to
Right.
play on driving down fixed costs or offshoring supply chains in a world in which you can't access goods from abroad,
Right.
or in which your raw materials, your timber, your wood pulp, your commodities prices, your energy prices are
Mm-hmm.
going up. And so you need a new tack. And what we talk about in the piece and we lay out is that the new tack is supplementing or replacing cost cutting with revenue maximization, and
Yeah.
that ushers in the age of recoupment, right? And what better way to max revenue and to drive up revenue than to just like overcharge or charge more than you anticipated
Right.
for goods?
And I think what is interesting about it is, I mean, you and I both know none of this is new. there's an entire philosophy called revenue management. It's an entire sort of subsection of economics of econ schools, business schools, and it's been around since the 70s. But we believe that a few things have come together in this moment to really supercharge this revenue management. So one of them is concentration. Companies are getting bigger. When companies have market power, they have pricing power, and they don't have to worry about being undercut by the competition.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's number one. Number two is technology. Companies now collect a massive amount of data on individual customers. They know what they shop for, but they also know when they shop. They know where they are in proximity to their products. They know just a whole thing, a whole series of things about behaviors and their incomes, their when they get paid in some instances. And so this technology can be contoured so that companies have this huge information advantage over the customer. And then the third thing is the pandemic, and this is where I think you guys really specialize. That the pandemic created this opportunity when prices rise because of supply chain concerns, because of all of the various reasons why there was inflation in the economy. It provides breathing space to test these additional strategies out. And because consumers, rather than thinking they're getting ripped off, they right away go to, oh, well, it's an inflationary environment, and that's why these prices are rising. It obviously has something to do with input costs or labor costs or things like that. And you brought some data to this story, which shows that actually the corporate profits that are driving inflation, they jumped up in 21 and 22, and then they just sort of stayed there even as supply chains eased. So I think that's the interesting part, the opportunity. Maybe you can just have
Yeah,
anything to add on that.
absolutely. We have kind of a literary analogy or kind of colloquial analogy we use at Groundwork where we talk about really needing sort of means, motive, and opportunity to
Right.
commit a crime or to really seal the deal here. And look, the motive is clear, right? Companies have to produce a return for their investors and their shareholders. That's what the board demands. That's what the investors demand. The means, I think, the companies have been amassing the means for a while, right? And you laid out both of them already. The first is companies got bigger, right? And bigger companies have bigger pricing power because they have more market power and less competition to undercut them. And the other means is the technology, the technological prowess to really execute some of these pricing strategies at the highest level. Pricing went high tech. And then what really is needed is opportunity, right? Sure, you know how to rob a bank, you know how to
Right.
get through the front door and disable the cameras, and that's where the money is, and you need money, so all of that's there. But you need an opportunity, right? You need maybe a dark night before you
Right.
head in, right? And the kind of cloud of inflation, the cover of inflation really provides that. Everybody is raising prices. Your competitors are raising prices. Your consumers expect prices to go up, so they're not really super focused on this because they're sort of like, oh, it's happening everywhere. They're not sort of looking particularly at you and your sophisticated new pricing strategy. So I think it was a kind of perfect storm for this age of recoupment to really be rolled out in its fullest form.
Yeah, absolutely. And that creates sort of these implications, particularly for policymakers, that I think are really interesting. We open our intro, which is called The Age of Recoupment, our intro to this series, with a set piece. It's Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, at the semi-annual monetary report in front of the Senate Banking Committee. And Sherrod Brown, the chair of the committee, who's running for re-election from Ohio, is talking about a bunch of different pricing strategies. He's talking about electronic price tags. He's talking about surge pricing. He's talking about the various ways in which companies are trying to, cheat their customers, basically. And he says to Powell, is this something that's increasing inflation? Is this something that you guys should be interested in and worried about? And you could almost see Powell recoil
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah.
He is supremely disinterested
Yeah.
in dictating how companies set their prices, or even commenting on how companies set their prices. And he kind of grabs at surge pricing and makes kind of an econ 101 argument that, well, surge pricing, it's sometimes good, it's sometimes bad. If there's fewer people in the store, it'll be a discount. If there's more people in the store, it'll be an increase. And it all works out in the end. And the macroeconomic impact is very muted and limited. And Sherrod Brown goes back to him and says, Chairman Powell, these companies hire economists to maximize profits. Do you really think that they're trying to give people breaks on prices? Is that really, you think that the overall impact of this is going to be neutral? And then, Powell just sort of throws up his hands. He's like, look, pricing's
Yeah.
very important in the economy, and I don't want. I think this is a really interesting side of this. Like,
Yeah.
and just talk about this. Like, if we're in this new age where prices are just a little bit, not completely, but a little bit more unmoored from supply and demand, a little bit unaffected by interest rates, it seems like the Fed is just at sea in this environment.
Yeah. Can we pick up on one piece of something you said first, which is Sherrod Brown making this really kind of simplistic, but actually essential point back to Powell, that like these companies are using sophisticated tools. They're hiring smart people. In some cases, they're outsourcing this and using consultants. They're not doing it to lose money, right? Like
Right.
they're not doing it to figure out a better coupon
It's like,
strategy.
it's power is in the story. Like it's just
Yeah.
common sense. This is why I think this is so intuitive to the public,
Yeah.
and that economists try to come up with a huge number, a blizzard of facts and figures to say, no, actually this is welfare enhancing, and
Yeah.
this is consumer surplus. But consumers get it. They're
Yeah.
hiring people to screw me over, and
Yeah.
that's what they do.
Well, and you have all these quotes like throughout the issue, the special issue of the Prospect, and the surveillance and personalized pricing chapter, and in the algorithmic price fixing chapter. So these great quotes from experts and like former sort of FTC investigators and lawyers who are saying things like, look, when you see a situation in the wild where people are giving up their very lucrative and valuable data, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their own heart. They're doing it
Right.
because there's something better on the other side, right? Is it the collusion that the algorithmic price fixing enables? Is it the
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated surveillance pricing that giving up, personal
Yeah.
data allows for? So Sherrod Brown is exactly right. These companies are not running these plays to lose money. But you were asking me sort of like why Powell bristled at the question.
Right.
Like I think there are sort of two reasons he bristles at the question. The first is, he's a macro guy who sits at, I mean, he's not an economist, but he's been doing running the Fed. It's a place focused on macroeconomics and monetary policy. They're not bothered with theories of the firm. They're not bothered with how pricing works, right? The title of our special issue. They're really living in a world in which, they have one theory of how inflation happens and how inflation comes down, and they have one tool for bringing it down, right? Inflation goes up because of demand, too much demand and too little supply, and you bring inflation down by crushing demand using interest
Right.
rates. So he doesn't really need to bother himself with petty details like what companies are actually doing, because he's got one tool and it's pegged to one theory, and that's the whole ball game where he works. But I also think he's a kind of traditional sort of neoliberal econ guy too, and he's in a a large institution filled with people who have that training, and who are
Yeah.
advising him from that background. And this is what they believe too. So it's an institutional culture as well. There was quite strikingly, one very high-ranking member of the Federal Reserve, who now runs the National Economic Council, Lael Brainerd, who actually quite regularly, when she was at the Fed, pointed out that corporate markups were well above expected levels, and that she felt like you could do well by bringing inflation down without needing so much demand destruction, because there was a lot of room for markups to fall. And so I think, but now she's not there, and she was a little bit of a unicorn in some respects, and they're back to their sort of regular story of demand
Yeah.
destruction ruling the day.
Yeah, more of a group think. So, I mean, the fact that the Federal Reserve isn't buying into this sort of recoupment idea isn't fatal to the whole concept of whether the government has a role to play
Right.
in policing these kinds of practices, especially if you believe, as I think many people do, that they're unfair and deceptive and not the way that people believe their information to be used when it's extracted from them. And we talk about, and we will get into more of this next week when we release the piece by your colleague Bilal Beydoun, uh, uh, about the strategies for what the government can do around this. And when we were on the Bloomberg podcast, Odd Lots, we talked about how it's a whole of government approach.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the ways that government can look at this situation. And then, after we finish this, we'll get into some of the details around some of the various pricing schemes. But some of the ways that government can get a handle on this if it's not something that the monetary authorities are willing or maybe even able to reach.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing we have to say is there are two things going on here. The first is that prices are high, and the second is that pricing is unfair. And there are a lot of folks in Washington who seem to not understand those two things, that those two things can be different, right? So a lot of folks in Washington are like, inflation is coming down. Why are people still angry about pricing? And the truth is, even if inflation comes down, pricing can still be and feel unfair. And what the president, I think, is doing when he is tapping in, when he's putting forward regulations on junk fees, is he's not just trying to bring inflation down, right? He's trying to address the fact that pricing is also unfair. How pricing works is a problem in the U.S. economy right now, and those two things can be related or distinct. And so, in the piece that my great colleague Bilal wrote, we look at a whole host of things that the government can do, right? So the first thing to say is, like, a lot of this, pick your four-letter word, crap, is already illegal, right?
Right.
It's already illegal.
Right.
So the first thing we can do is, like, enforce the law on the books, right? Lena Khan, the commissioner of the FTC, has said quite clearly, algorithmic price fixing is price fixing.
Right.
You quote the former FTC official in the prospect who says, look, like, every time you see the word algorithm, put the word Bob in. And if Bob is price fixing, then the algorithm is price fixing, right?
Right.
It's all
Right.
illegal, right?
Right.
So the first thing we can do is crack down on the crap that's already illegal. And the algorithmic price fixing fits that bill, as well as some of the other really deceptive forms of pricing. The second thing we can do is update the law to account for things that we think should be illegal. So look, there are laws precluding, prohibiting unfair and deceptive practices. Senator Casey, also up for reelection, member of the Finance Committee, has said, shrinkflation is a deceptive practice and should be regulated as such, and has put forward
And that
legislation.
is, let's explain what that is briefly. Shrinkflation is when the size of a particular item, particularly groceries, but not only groceries, the size of a particular item goes down and the price stays the same or even goes up. one thing that's interesting is that other countries have figured out ways to combat this. In France, there are actual warning labels
Yeah.
that go onto products that have shrunk in size without shrinking in price. Like they literally put a shrinkflation warning label on things, and that's a technique that we could adopt here.
Yeah, the grocers like slap the label on
Yeah,
the 12 pack of Pepsi that just became a 10 pack. And you don't notice
right.
because they're, bundled in a cardboard box, right?
But
Um,
yeah, absolutely. It's funny. But I'll give you a perfect example of something that inflation would not pick up, but unfairness is clearly in the mix. And that is a piece we got coming out on Monday on subscription pricing.
yeah,
So, subscription pricing, let's say something's $5.99 a month and it doesn't change, or maybe it goes up, very slightly to $6.25 a month or something over the course of years. It's not inflation. It's not increasing in price over time. However, if you're getting fed dark patterns to sort of trick you or deceive you into keeping that subscription and making it very hard for you to cancel that subscription once you've taken it on, then that's something that people perceive as unfair, even though it has not increased in price. It increases your expenses as you carry these on, and you also, these subscription prices that are micropayments are very easy to forget about. We have a
yeah,
stat coming in that Monday piece that surveyed people and said, how much do you pay on subscriptions? How much do you think you pay on subscriptions? And the average answer was something like $85. And then they looked at their books of these
yeah,
people and saw how much they actually pay on subscription, and it was $215.
yeah.
So there's inflation, sort of in the sense of your monthly budget is much higher than you think it is, but it's not traditional inflation. It's
Yeah.
this. It speaks to this unfairness in the economy.
Yeah. Can we talk about personal subscription stories?
Definitely.
Okay, so I had a baby about 9 months ago, and there were a handful of things I needed that I am not used to. So I had a subscription for
Right.
postnatal vitamins, and I had a subscription for this product called Little Mix-ins, which is basically this sort of like
Okay.
powdered allergens that you have to kind of like put into baby food to kind of
Oh, okay.
sensitize your baby so that they don't have a peanut allergy and things like that. And I thought I purchased sort of like one set of both of them, but as the sort of bleary nights went on, I realized that I was in subscriptions to both of them. So I have like a stack of postnatal vitamins and like dozens of vials of powdered peanut at my house, and it took me 3 or 4 tries to get out of both of the subscriptions. And I'm,
Yeah.
a reasonably savvy consumer, but I think I maybe got into them via Instagram. And so when it was time to get out of them, I didn't sort of know where to find them, right? They weren't sort of, I didn't have like good email traffic on it. I couldn't go to the website because it didn't have sort of my personal information. It took me a really long time to unwind those. And increasingly with online
And
shopping, that type of behavior is not accidental, right? If
absolutely not.
think about it from the company's perspective, like you don't even really have to overcharge someone on the initial thing of vitamins, right? $14 for the vitamins or $10 for the peanut powder. But they're gonna get you triple or quadruple by you ending up with 4 of them, right?
Right. Absolutely. And the idea that you have to be this super savvy consumer and track everything that you're doing online, worry about the data collection, worry about this and that. There was a comment, this is coming in a future piece, that was made to the FTC, and it was in a different context. It was about a auto dealership and buying a car. And the guy was a veteran, and the comment was something like, I never thought that I would, go to war, put on battle gear, and then have to do the same thing when I come home in the civilian world, just to go make a purchase, that I have to be on guard, that I have to have this sort of hair trigger sense about me,
Yeah.
just to navigate through life and make the purchases that I need to, for my necessary survival. And that's the problem at its core. Like, you're not going to beat these companies by being more savvy, but the fact that you have to like keep yourself on guard in the economy, I think that speaks to the feeling that a lot of people have that things are unfair and they have to do whatever they can to protect themselves. And government needs to step in and be that protector in these instances.
Yeah, I mean, look, we at Groundwork talk about this issue a lot. And so we do a lot of interviews with the press, reporters, podcasts, things like that. And inevitably, once or twice a week, someone asks, like, Lindsay, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before we drop, tell my listeners what they can do to avoid all of this, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I always give a somewhat unsatisfying answer, but I don't believe it is an individual's responsibility to figure out how to avoid all this. And I also, frankly, don't think you can coupon clip your way out of this one, right?
Right. Yeah.
If dynamic pricing is happening so rapidly that between the time you leave your house and get to the grocery store where you think a good deal is, the deal no longer exists, like you're not gonna beat the clock on this one. You're not gonna beat the computer on this one. And so
Yeah.
really it is the responsibility of government at all levels, state, federal, agencies, congressional lawmakers, to create a level playing field for consumers, a market in which you can purchase the goods that you need or want in a fair way, without being tricked, without having to face abusive or deceptive or unfair practices, and without being subject to pricing that is anti-competitive, without being subject to price fixing and price gouging.
Absolutely. So just like in the context of subscriptions, the FTC has proposed a rule called click to cancel. And the click to cancel rule says that it has to be as easy to cancel a
Yeah.
subscription as it is to
Yeah.
sign up for one. And
Yes.
that's not the way of the world right now.
No.
It's a very, like, we call it the Hotel California economy. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. That's how it's set up, and it's how it's engineered, sort of, behind the scenes, to make it very hard to get out. And so government has a role to play to make sure that is not the case, and that's as easy to get rid of something as it is to sign up for it. So let's talk about what I think is sort of the next frontier of this thing. It's the piece I wrote, and it's called One Person, One Price. And it's this concept that has been sort of in the air for many, many years in economic circles, this idea of the technical term is first degree price discrimination.
Yeah.
But it's usually euphemized into this term of personalized pricing, which sounds so nice. I mean, look, I get my own price. I'm so special that there's a price tailored just for me,
Right.
right?
Right.
I kind of tweak that to call it surveillance pricing, because it's pricing based on everything that a company knows about you, whether it's your web habits, your browsing habits, your social media habits, whether it's the first degree stuff that you put into an app when you order something, where you are in location and proximity to the store, your financial behaviors, and then all this other ancillary information that gets thrown in, your travel information, your medical information, and whatnot, to create what is known in the advertising business, as an identity graph.
Yeah.
And so once a company has all of that information on you, they can predict your behaviors probably better than you can. I mean, I remember this story a few years back about a woman who was starting to get targeted ads for things like diapers and bassinets and cribs, and she didn't know she was pregnant.
Yeah.
But when she went to the doctor, she found out she was. And it was like the algorithm figured out before she did that she was pregnant, based on her other shopping habits and or other behaviors.
Yeah.
Um, this is like the dystopia that we're that we're headed
Yeah.
toward. I mean, talk about this massive amount of data collection that
Yeah.
goes on through the economy.
I think it helps to kind of use an illustration in some ways. Like you kind of need to think about going through the world with a QR code tattooed on your forehead, right?
Right.
And the QR code tattooed on the forehead is your identity graph, right? And when
Yep.
you walk into a store, let's say you go into the supermarket, to your Albertsons, to your Kroger, um, the shelves have little cameras and scanners that read your QR code and then price accordingly. So let's say you're walking through Kroger and the milk, cabinet reads your QR code and says, "Oh, she usually buys a gallon of oat milk every week. She didn't buy a gallon last week. She's probably pretty hard up for oat milk. Let's go from $3.49 to $4.49, right?
Right.
That's what we're talking about here when we talk about personalized pricing, right? Then you head over to the bread aisle and similarly, you're someone who buys bread every week. They feel like you're pretty much a sure thing. Jack up the price of bread 75, 80 cents, right? That might feel far-fetched. It might feel a little bit like a kind of
Yeah.
paranoid nightmare where you're sort of on a, parallel universe version of The Price is Right. And Bob Barker is sitting in the back, like smoking a cigar, like flipping the price tags, right? As you walk through the grocery store. But that's what we're seeing. And that's the world we're in the world of personalized pricing.
Well,
And
and I think the world that we're heading towards and what makes this more possible is the end of the public price.
yep.
So, it's not as easy to do this kind of thing if you're in line and you have your Celsius energy drink, and for you they're charging $3.49, and the guy behind you it's $2.99,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, what the hell? Like that guy's paying
Yeah.
50 cents less than me. I don't want to. I mean, come on, what are you doing? And indeed, there are instances of companies doing this kind of personalized pricing, getting caught and
Yeah.
saying, we'll never do it again. I'm sorry. Like there was a famous one, Amazon in the early 2000s, were doing random pricing for DVDs, and people figured it out. They even like deleted their cookies and
Yeah.
their browsing history,
Yeah.
and they would get served different prices. And Amazon apologized, said, we'll never do that again. Nobody believes that they never do that again. Amazon has like 1 million prices an hour,
Yeah.
and that's documented. But they claim, oh, we're very sorry. They kind of begged forgiveness. The way that you actually can accomplish this is by atomizing the consumer, by
Exactly.
isolating the consumer so that there is no public price. And
Right.
so the things I talk about in the article are things like the McDonald's app.
Yes.
And an app is just sort of a skin that is a website, but it's very personalized and targeted towards you. It's on your phone. And many people have been lured to the McDonald's app because there are prices that are discounted from the public price, at least for now. And I believe there are 50 million people worldwide on the McDonald's app, and they're being targeted with prices and
Yeah.
with offers all the time. The company that makes the McDonald's app, Plexure, says they have 500 million interactions a day with their customers. And that's not just with McDonald's, they have other apps, but it's a massive amount of interactions with customers.
Yeah.
And if they have all this accumulated information and data, and they know I get an Egg McMuffin every morning around 9 a.m. because that's right before my work shift. And I might get 2 Egg McMuffins on Friday because I just got paid. They have the raw materials to increase that price at that point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they have everything they need to say, okay, at this time of day, this customer is going to be charged this much, and we're going to charge him less at different times of day to try to increase our market share. But we're going to personalize that price and individualize that price at every time. And you can
Well,
just extend that out from the app. And I want to hear from you, but briefly, you can just extend that out from the app to smart speakers like the Alexa, smart TVs that give you direct in-house offers that you can literally hit a QR code and go directly from your TV to buy something. Or any other kind of smart device, and so isolating the consumer, I think, is the really key feature here.
yeah, just to put a finer point on isolating the consumer, which I think you're 100% right. Let's use a very related example within fast food, which is that Wendy's announced that they were going to use
Yeah.
digital menu boards to basically facilitate dynamic pricing at the drive-through, and there was
Right.
huge public outrage, and
Right.
yet you're already experiencing the digital menu board of one in
Right.
your McDonald's app, right? In the same industry. But
Absolutely.
this idea that it would happen sort of like that you could pay one price and someone three cars behind you in the drive-through line would pay another felt really unfair. But you don't realize that that's exactly what's happening to you in the app. It's just that you don't see it because
Right.
you're isolated, you're atomized, and it's much easier to sort of to run the play to overprice you when you don't have the ability to kind of look around and see if everyone's paying a similar amount, right? So
Absolutely.
this is so critical,
Absolutely.
I think, to running this play in the most sort of mercenary and aggressive way, and in the way that facilitates the least pushback on the
Right.
corporation.
Absolutely. And, we noted that this is nothing new. In today's piece that's up is about surge pricing, dynamic
Yeah,
pricing, and it
yeah.
mentions the Wendy's thing. And it mentions that 25 years before Wendy's made that announcement,
Yeah.
Coca-Cola
Coke,
was
yeah.
musing
Yeah.
about putting thermometers in their vending machines so that if it was hot out, they would increase the price of the beverage.
Yeah.
And then people got really pissed at that too. So this has kind of been a never-ending push, a never-ending seeking out of opportunities. And now, of course, the fact that you can be more isolated, you can get people on an app, you can get people on a browser, you can get people on a smart device. It makes this possibility real. In a way that it really wasn't before. There are these sort of QR codes that are stamped on us. As you like, when you read my story, you said, "Well, why don't you talk about credit scores?" Right? I mean, we already have this sort of unique identifier, and it was based. You gave this fascinating history to me, which I adopted. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for some of the piece. The invention of the credit score came out of gossip. It came out of private investigators literally spying on people and picking up rumors about people as to whether or not they would be a good credit risk. That was the origins
Yeah.
of the credit score. It wasn't
Yeah.
anything like rigid or rigorous or technical in
Yeah.
any way. It was literally rumor mongering.
Yeah.
Was the
Yeah,
intro of
I
the
mean, it
credit
wasn't
score.
just private investigators, right? Like your neighbor could serve up the
Right.
tea, right?
Right.
On what they thought. Oh, I think I saw the repo man over at their house the other day. They might be behind on their car payment, right?
So now we're turning like this, and at some point along the way, the rumor was sort of turned into fact, and now
Right.
they pick up these rumors
It's
from your
quantified,
other
right? A number.
your
Yeah.
other creditors who tell them,
Yeah.
yeah, he paid this bill, or yeah, he didn't pay this bill, and that's kind of what business is doing right now by turning these bits of information into a fact pattern about how you shop and what you buy and when you buy, and sort of exposing your own secrets
Well,
to the rest of the business world.
the other sort of historical example here, in addition to the credit score, which I think is kind of the first, is the insurance industry is modeled after this as well, right? I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
used to be prior to the ACA, health insurance companies set premiums based on a whole host of pre-existing conditions and behaviors
Right.
that they knew about
Right.
consumers, patients, the insured, the claimant. Similarly, we've got stories now of companies flying drones over backyards to decide how much to charge you for property insurance, or
Yes.
car companies using your driving data and shipping it over to the insurer to decide how much to charge you in premiums based on how many times you slam the brakes, right? So this type of sort of surveillance pricing has been very common in credit scoring for over a century, and then of course in insurance for a considerable time as well.
Yeah, we've got a piece coming next week on hospital pricing. And one of the interesting things there is the way in which the electronic health records have been co-opted for the benefit of pricing, and specifically for pricing the government and overcharging the government. In the Obamacare era, this idea was, hey, we have everything in a hospital on paper records. This is very inefficient. We want to be able to transfer things from one hospital to another. If you're seeking a second opinion, that company should have, or that
Yeah.
hospital, that provider should have all the data on you. And so we want to do these electronic health records. And they did them. They spent a lot of money to get all these hospitals and providers up to speed on electronic health records. And they come with these things called codes. And the code corresponds to your particular medical situation. And very quickly, providers learned, if I put more codes on here, if I say
Yeah.
that you have 7 illnesses, I'm going to get more money from the government, particularly from Medicare or
Yeah.
Medicaid, for treating you, even if I'm only treating one of those 7 illnesses. It's so this phenomenon of what is called upcoding is using a technology to extract data from the patient of various behaviors and in this case medical realities about the patient, and use that in pricing. But only the person that is experiencing the price isn't the patient necessarily. It's the insurer, it's the
Yeah.
government, it's these
Yeah.
intermediaries. So we see this pattern kind of replicated across all of these different industries. That's why I think is really interesting about when we talk about algorithmic price fixing. It starts from this information exchange called ATPCO in the after deregulation, after the 1970s, and all these other companies start to adopt it and refine it and make it even more kind of overt collusion, where essentially entire segments of a market are being collected, all of the proprietary data about prices, about supply, about really everything about the business is collected, distributed to all the market participants in that particular market, and encouraged to, hey, if we all raise the price at the same rate, there's no means of escape for the consumer.
Yeah.
And this concept has been taken from airlines now to real estate, to hotels, to pharmaceuticals, to agriculture. And it's just a cookie cutter kind of formation that takes this concept of algorithmic collusion of, instead of 3 people in a room gets together, an intermediary collects everything from 3 people in a room, and the same dynamics persist.
Yeah.
And it's being brought into a bunch of different content.
Look, these are all really old tricks, right?
Right.
We say something in the piece, which is that these new technologies are sort of re-envisioning, reimagining, hypercharging something that's as old as dirt, right?
Right.
Overcharging you. And I think, there are some interesting um, kind of predicate things that are happening that we can isolate that are facilitating this, right? You talked about atomization and isolation being a predicate. Vast data collection abilities are a predicate, right? COVID happens, people are doing more online shopping, more data to hoover up. Algorithmic and predictive technologies allow for cloud computing allows you to actually
Hmm.
collect all this data and then
Hmm.
use math, right, to figure out what you want to do with the data, right? So these are all things that that in some ways are kind of are not particularly new or innovative. I think what they are is sort of accelerated and
Yeah.
reimagined, and in some
Can I give you?
cases,
I
yeah,
was just going to say, can I give you another predicate that I think has led
yeah,
to this? Legal impunity.
yeah,
So
totally. Corporate power and legal impunity. Yes.
one of the things we talk about in the junk fee piece is the fact that corporations were able to secure from the Supreme Court and lower courts the ability to use mandatory arbitration agreements in their
Yeah.
customer contracts has made it almost impossible for the individual as a private litigant to say, I was ripped off and I'm going to sue you for that.
Yeah.
You're not able to go to an Article 3 court. You have to go
Yeah.
through this Byzantine arbitration process. You can't band together to make a class action lawsuit saying, hey, you said there was going to be one price, and then when we click through to the final screen, there was all these other charges thrown on. You can't run a class action lawsuit to sue Ticketmaster over that,
Right.
for example, because the arbitration agreement says, no, you individual have to go through
Yeah.
this massive process and hire a lawyer for $20. You're just not going to do that. There's no way that you as the consumer are going to spend, this massive amount of money to collect $20 or whatever it is that you were overcharged. And that gives this sort of free license to companies to come up with these schemes because they're protected at the customer level, at the private litigant level. That's why government needs to be more of a factor here.
Yeah.
And to be clear, it is becoming more of a factor here.
Yeah. And just to like put one fine point on that, legal impunity is ultimately about corporate power, right? And we
Right.
maybe sort of blew past corporate power when we just talked about corporate size, right? In some ways,
Right.
that's kind of like a sanitized, technocratic way to talk about what's really happening here, which is when
Right.
corporations get big, there are a few things you get to do when you're big, right? One is you get to like overcharge people in some cases because you're not worried about the competition undercutting you. But also when you're big, you have big power in government,
Right.
big power in the courts and the legal system. And so
Right.
corporate power and the just phenomenal amount of power large companies have, these large tech companies in particular have in the US context and globally is certainly a predicate to what we're seeing, wreaked upon the consumer today.
I'll give a good example of, and you're absolutely right, economic power converting into political power. Another way that power is importantly in the mix is through what has been termed power buyers.
Yeah.
And our piece on grocery pricing, which is coming next week, I think is a good example of this. The FTC put out a report a couple months ago about what happened during the pandemic when supplies were short. And what happened was the big companies, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Krogers of the world, said to their suppliers, we're your power buyers. We're the people that you sell the most to. You have to supply us first during the
Yeah.
pandemic. You
Yeah.
can't supply these little piddling independent stores. You
Yeah.
have to give us what you
Yeah.
got. And if you don't, we'll cut you off. And so suppliers obliged. They supplied Amazon, they supplied Walmart, they supplied Kroger, and the small mom and pops had these empty shelves,
Yeah.
and it had a huge impact. And now, if you're an Amazon or you're a Walmart, your competition actually doesn't have the goods that people want, and so
Yeah.
that gives you even more pricing power. And we see this kind of every day on everyday level in the grocery store, just by virtue of where things are situated on a shelf. And there's this kind of great auction that goes on that nobody knows
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
where there are basically bidding wars that go on for shelf space. And the only way you're going to win that bidding war for shelf space is if you're a big company. And that's why we see all of these food companies buying up dozens of brands, different, you have this illusion of choice when you go into a grocery store and you think there's hundreds of
Right.
items, but it's all like 10 companies.
Right.
And the where they are situated on the shelf, the fact that they're at eye level or that they're at the end on the end caps of a shelf of an aisle is because they paid to get there, and their competitors can't pay to get
Yeah. I mean, do you watch Shark Tank, Dave?
there. Occasionally.
I mean, you see this happens on Shark Tank all the time, right? Which is the companies come on and they've invented like a new popcorn or a new pancake or a
Right.
new bag of chips or a new energy drink or a new canned iced tea with kombucha and probiotics or whatever the newfangled food item is. And inevitably the sharks are sort of like, yeah, but like, how are you going to get on the shelves, right? Like,
Right.
because the shelf space is not a sort of come one, come all proposition, right? The shelf space goes to the highest bidder. If you're a small dog, you're not going to be the highest bidder. So hopefully, a couple people see you on Shark Tank and buy your stuff
Right.
online because they're not going to
Right.
see it at Whole Foods, right? But
Right.
but this is incredibly prohibitive of competition, of innovation, of new and better products in the American economy.
Absolutely. We write about Snoop Dogg cereal
Right. Right.
in
Even
the
Snoop
the
Dogg
issue.
couldn't
Even
get
even
through the
someone who's a
slotting fee
celebrity, exactly,
play.
couldn't
Yeah.
get through the play. He signed this thing with General Mills, or no, Post. I'm sorry. Don't
I mean, he
don't
basically got
don't
caught
don't
and
write me
killed,
General
right?
Mills. It was Post Foods. Yeah, it was a catch and kill operation.
Yeah.
Post Foods said, "We're going to have a marketing agreement with you, and we're going to get you into Walmart." And then they just didn't do anything. They basically took the money for the marketing agreement, or took the responsibility, and they deep sixed Snoop cereal, which was all in the
Yeah.
back room, the
Yeah.
storerooms
It
of
didn't
these
even make it to
Walmarts,
the shelves.
with
Yeah.
a label on it saying "Do not shelve." Right.
Yeah.
So there are even instances that I've heard about what they call category captains,
Yeah.
where the retailers actually outsource the decision making of where things go on the shelf and these slotting fees to the food companies. So Unilever like owns the particular shelf, and they're gonna make a
Yeah.
determination probably in the best interest of Unilever
Unilever. Right.
in terms of where things go on that particular shelf. So
Yeah, that's exactly right.
there's just a whole bunch of different things, and obviously all this whole bidding war goes into the cost, the input costs of the product, which eventually goes into the price that you pay. So it's not just that the biggest companies can get to the shelf, but it's also that they're paying a certain fee to get to these eyeballs, and you end up paying for that fee.
Yeah, and by the way, going back to our sort of policy solutions, some of this is already illegal and could be enforced more robustly and rigorously, right? I think
Yeah.
Robinson Patman, slotting fees are arguably in violation of some existing competition statutes. So I think there's a considerable amount, that we can take on over time to level the playing field here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the administration is doing a pretty good job of that. I mean, Rohit Chopra coined the term junk fees,
Sure.
and the administration has been pretty active on that. They just actually, it looks like they haven't actually put out the case, but it looks like the FTC is going to put out the first Robinson Patman case in probably 40 years against a winemaker, or not wine, but spirits, called the Southern Glazer.
Yeah.
We see the FTC is trying to ban junk fees, basically with a disclosure rule with upfront pricing. The Department of Transportation has followed suit on that. We see this across a whole host of industries, and it's somewhat encouraging. But one thing I will say, and we only have a few minutes left, but one thing that you guys have stressed a lot is that there's a way to enforce this that's a little bit off the radar screen, and it involves taxes. And so, could you talk about how
Yeah.
tax policy can play a role here in terms of fair pricing?
Yeah, look, the short version is it's not a coincidence that the corporate rate went down to close to rock bottom, although not all the way to rock bottom, right? In 2017, President Trump and Republicans in Congress, against the full objection of Democrats, not a single Democrat, House or Senate, voted for legislation to take the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. And the thing about a lower corporate tax rate is you get to keep more of your winnings when you overcharge people. So it's just a lot more fun to overcharge you when you don't have to ship quite as much of it back to the Treasury Department. And so, if President Trump is reelected, his advisors have been very clear about his intentions to take the corporate rate even further, down to something as low as 13%. We've heard serious Trump advisors mention as a candidate possibility. That will effectively, just reward all of the companies who've been gouging Americans over the last few years with a huge, huge payout.
Right.
35% to 21% to 13%. Remember, corporate profit margins are already at 70-year historic highs in the post-pandemic period. And at the end of 2023, after-tax corporate profits for non-financial firms hit their all-time record high. So we're already in a just extraordinarily ahistorical, profitable era. And if Trump is elected, that will only accelerate. And the flip side, of course, is that next year, many of the provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that passed in 2017 are
Right.
slated to expire.
Right.
But there's no reason we need to limit our ambition for rebuilding a fair tax code merely to the expiring provisions. Corporate should be back on the table. Let's take the corporate rate back up to 25, 28, 35%. And get some of our freaking money back from these last few years of gouging.
I like when the anger comes through. I like that part of it. Well, look, it was just so fantastic working with you guys once again on this issue.
Yeah,
I believe the
always.
third issue that we've
Yeah.
done together, and it's called "How Pricing Really Works." You can pick it up wherever you can get the magazine, but you can see all the various pieces at prospect.org/pricing. And I should mention, for people watching who are in the DC area, we're actually going to have a launch party for this issue next Tuesday. It's at Sud House, which is on U Street in DC. If you come to my Twitter or prospect.org, you can find out more details. And we're going to have copies of the magazine there that will be available. Lindsay Owens, thank you so much for coming on the show here, and thanks for your partnership with these special issues, including this one on pricing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.